So we have our next installment of Unafraid, the series that we're studying of Adam Hamilton's. And it's not too late to join one of the small groups if you're of a mind to do so, either Monday evening at 7 or Tuesday or Wednesday morning at 10:30. Or there are any number of folks who have just decided to buy the book and read along. It's a good one. I should write Adam Hamilton and ask for a cut. I've sold enough of these books now, but, what are you going to do? He's worthy, and I know that I'm pretty sure that he donates pretty much the vast majority of things from his books back to the church, so we can feel good about that as well. So the portion of the book that we're dealing with this week is entitled Apocalypse, Change, Missing Out, and Finances. Well, there's a title for you. Zoinks. I figured, my goodness, we really need to narrow this down. So as you can tell from the title slide, we've narrowed it down to fear of the future. All of these things really boil down to being afraid of the future. And it is reasonable to be afraid of the future. Most of our fears are fear of the unknown, right? And what is less known than what has not yet happened, right? We do our best to overcome those fears. We try to make the future known to us, to control it to the best of our abilities. We have our planners and our calendars. We consult our weather apps. We make our lists. But inevitably, a broken appliance in the morning, or an unexpected phone call in the afternoon, or a thunderstorm in the evening that knocks out the power, changes the trajectory of our day or week. We make plans, as the saying goes, and God laughs. Or occasionally, unfortunately, we make plans and God cries when things go particularly wrong. But into this chaos, Jesus speaks to us these words that Jack read for us this morning from Matthew 6. So do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will bring worries of its own. Today's trouble is enough for today. Well, easy for you to say, Jesus. How, with as complicated as our lives can be, are we supposed to get by without worrying about all these things he's telling us not to worry about? Food, clothes, health, let alone our finances, our homes, and the constant change of the world around us. Thankfully, this same Jesus who tells us not to worry is also the same Jesus who counsels his disciples, which of you intending to build a tower does not first sit down and estimate the cost to see whether he has enough to complete it? So Jesus does not reject prudent planning. This has led me to make a distinction of my own that I've shared with the class. I think it's biblical. I think it plays out with these verses. The distinction between concern on the one hand and worry on the other. So for instance, in our household, we've always needed to be frugal about grocery shopping. And so early on, Jen got into the habit of planning a weekly menu. We still have a weekly menu. She still draws it old school by hand and decorates it up depending on the month, and it's on the refrigerator so everybody knows, at the beginning of the week what all's coming. On those nights that it's one of James's favorites, he's sure to have a small lunch, so he's got plenty of appetite for dinner. And more recently, with her diagnosis of diabetes, Jen has needed to be concerned about eating healthier, which has also required extra vigilance in planning, and had the happy result of us all probably eating a little healthier, which has been good. Now, these things I quantify as concerns, not worries. We make the plans, and if we have to occasionally deviate from the plan, right? Not enough people are going to be home one night to make the meal worth cooking, so we do carry out. Or we have a birthday, so Jen allows herself some dessert. If we vary, it's not a big deal. We don't have to worry about it. Now, worrying about food is what the Israelites did in the desert when they tried to hoard manna and save it over for the next day, because they were worried that God wouldn't provide. Or you may have seen the meme on social media. It says, there are two kinds of people in the world: those who go to a pizza party and take only one slice because there may not be enough to go around, and those who take 3 slices because there may not be enough to go around. In this instance, worry makes us selfish, and our fear turns us against each other's interests. When our kids were little, we needed to be concerned about suitable clothing for them, right? Especially when the stores never seemed to have anything in season, right? Jen and I always joked in retirement we were going to open up a store that was called When You Need It. And it would just have stuff in the actual season. I've been informed that this is not the case everywhere in the country. Evidently, Alabama has all sorts of stores that are When You Need It. But up here, it seems like, the swimsuits are available in March and the boots are available in August. And that's when you'd have to shop for them. You'd have to plan ahead to make sure you had the stuff you needed. But we never worried. We had the concern and planned ahead. But we never worried, nor did our kids, thankfully, about having the coolest clothes, designer denim or status shoes. Sometimes this got me into trouble with my wife, who at least wanted me to be a little fashion conscious with the kids. I took Aaron shoe shopping one time, and we came back with what I thought were a perfectly fine pair of white sneakers. And my wife looked at that and said, "Those are old man shoes. You've got to take those back." So that is a constant rub of dialogue on family night. Yeah, you'd be there and wear old man shoes. Concern for clothing is one thing, but worrying about what kind or how many is a whole other story. And Jesus is surely right when he opines, "Can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your span of life?" Very true. But healthy concern can at least keep us from subtracting hours from our lives, or even years. I'm not sure if the statistic still holds. It was quite a while ago that I heard it, but I remember at one time they said that every cigarette you smoked took 6 minutes off your life. I always assumed it probably made another 6 minutes miserable. Obviously, concern about refraining from other bodily abuses too, drug use or intemperate consumption of alcohol, is likewise helpful in doing no harm. Concern for health is at the heart of why we have masked through COVID and why many of us have decided to get vaccinated and boosted. Healthy concern is good. But worrying about our health, on the other hand, is at the root of all sorts of disorders. Anxiety disorders, eating disorders, panic disorders, and can be just as damaging to our health as the conditions we were worrying about in the first place. Chronic worriers are much more likely to buy into scam miracle products, right? Which, while packaged far more convincingly than the snake oil the Mr. Haney's of the world used to try to pawn in the 19th century, are every bit as fraudulent. Now, one of the most common responses nowadays to Jesus' charge not to worry is that, "Jesus, you just have no idea of the complexities of today's modern finances." But again, I think it's important to differentiate between concern and worry. It's a good thing to be concerned about finances. Often that concern is rooted, after all, in our concern for others. So early on, when I first got into ministry, thankfully the thought occurred to me, if anything ever happened to me, not only is Jen without me, but Jen is without a house, because we always lived in parsonages. What on earth would she do if something happened to me? So even though we really were a little hard-pressed to afford it, I took out a big honkin' term life policy, because I knew that the first thing that she would have to do if anything happened to me was buy a house. We do those things to prepare for others. We save for retirement. We do so for ourselves, certainly on the one hand, but we do so also for our spouses, for our children, for those who will be charged with giving us care in our older years, so that there are resources for that. And hopefully we also save so that we have opportunities to give, and to give generously. Where worrying about finances becomes a downfall is when, lacking gratitude for what we have, we constantly aspire to more, fooling ourselves that having just a little more will guarantee our security and will give us control we really don't have. Adam Hamilton has a section of this chapter where he writes, according to a recent survey conducted by the American Psychological Association, money is the #1 source of stress for Americans. This is true not only for lower income people, but also for middle income and, perhaps surprisingly, high income people. Even millionaires worry about financial security. The Swiss financial firm UBS conducted a survey not long ago of over 2,000 U.S. investors with a net worth of at least $1 million. And more than 600 of them had a net worth in excess of $5 million. Of those millionaires who were millennials, half said they were somewhat or very afraid of losing their wealth. When the millionaires were asked, about how much wealth do you aspire to eventually have? Not surprisingly, the wealthier the respondent was, the higher the reported financial goal. Those with 1 million want 2, those with 10 million want 25. And all that money didn't seem to garner them much security either, in their own minds at least. The future always brings with it, to one degree or another, change. And change and the fear of change is one of the greatest sources of our anxiety, because it reminds us of how little we are actually in control. It reveals our deepest insecurities. But, and as we all well know, because you've experienced it in your life, change can also be an opportunity to renew and reanimate us. When change is a concern for us rather than a worry, well, it motivates us to action. We plan, we do research, and in taking action, we alleviate our anxieties. But that requires faith. Faith in our God-given abilities and gifts, faith to reach out to others and ask for help when we need it, and faith in God's presence and provision when all else seems to fail. Worrying about change, on the other hand, often precludes us from adapting to it, paralyzes us. And that paralysis, whether in our own personal lives or in our institutional lives as communities, churches, causes us to atrophy and die. Oftentimes, you probably can point to times in this in your own life, we can mistake our anxiety for action. We anxiously do busy work, right? Hoping that that will do the trick. But we're like hamsters on the wheel, furiously spinning to nowhere but exhaustion. Concern requires faith. Worry instills despair. Speaking of institutional change and institutional worries, it is reasonable and understandable, especially as we look at the world around us and read the statistics, to have fears about the future of the church. Not just this congregation, but the church in general. Right? The institutional metrics in terms of numbers attending, numbers believing, numbers giving financially are all trending downward. Yes, there are still plenty of churches, some of which are large and appear to be thriving, but most of those places have simply benefited from people who are already churched, shifting allegiances to a larger program. Many of you remember our past youth director, Aaron Gross. He went from here to Kensington, and the job description for him was not to grow the youth program, but was to maintain the youth program. They had already shifted out of accelerating mode to let's just try to hang on to it. And since then, Aaron has moved on out of youth ministry altogether to have his own parish with mostly adults down south in South Carolina. He's seen the writing on the wall, even in the largest places. We have fewer and fewer youth. But rather than worrying or furiously spinning to exhaustion on the hamster wheel, I know God's Spirit is calling us to recognize this as an exciting opportunity for renewal, reanimation, and resurrection. The church has gone through cycles like this before. That's what death and resurrection is all about. An old way dies, and the God's Spirit breathes new life. And we get to be a part of that if we're ready to face those fears with action rather than with anxiety. I know we are an older congregation. I'm one of the younger among us, and my hair's still gray. I know our culture has made many of you think that because you're retired, you're not as useful as you used to be. But that ain't so. You are gifted. You are called. Your purpose may have shifted over time, but you still have one. You still have many purposes. While life and breath are still in each of us, we can be on a care team, making calls or writing cards. You can help prepare a community meal or cook for the meal train or deliver a lunch for Blessings in a Brown Bag. You can participate in a small group or volunteer in the office or teach a Sunday school class or simply correspond with one of our kids or youth or college-age young adults to help them know and feel hope in a world that is busy peddling hopelessness like it's hotcakes. You have the power. Seize it. Speaking of our kids, I would be remiss on this Father's Day not to mention that it's those kids that have made many of us fathers. And it's appropriate today to think about the fears which fathers, grandfathers, along with mothers and grandmothers and all who do the work of parenting have endured and continue to wrestle with. My brief but sincere apologies to those who have not chosen to be parents. And my respect, too. I think our single folks or our couples without children often get overlooked in this culture. Just as a side note, I think parenting is a real calling. And I respect very much those folks who have said, that isn't for me. Because I'm afraid probably too many kids have been brought into the world just because of procreation peer pressure. Everybody's doing it. So single folks and couples without kids that have said, that's not for me, respect and props. But a moment for those of us who have been the parenting class. I've often bristled at the saying, let go and let God. Only because so many times I've heard it being said in laziness. I don't want to deal with it, so I'm just giving it to God. Ignoring the fact that God has given us agency, and while surely limited, at least a modicum of control, or at least decision-making ability. But in the case of raising children, there does come a point where letting go is the faithful response. While our children are young and dependent upon us, they are our constant concern. We do our best to provide for them and to prepare them in multiple ways. And as many of you well know, we never stop being concerned for them, and where there's appropriate help to be given, we do it. But we can't, we shouldn't, worry, spinning on the hamster wheel of regret or wonderment. Should we have pushed them harder here or not so hard there? Should we have sent them to this school instead of that one? If we hadn't moved at that time, would they be happier or have more friends, right? Those of you who are parents, you've asked all those questions. But at some point, we just have to realize we've done what we could, we did what we did, and now we have to let go in faith. Faith in them. Faith that at least some of what we did was good and doesn't require too much therapy. Faith that they know we love them, and faith in God's presence and provision for them as they go forward into an uncertain but hopeful future. Rather than becoming prisoners of worry, all of us should become what the prophet Zechariah called prisoners of hope. You may remember the chorus of the Gaither song, and if you do, feel free to sing it along with me. Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone, or at least most of it. Because I know he holds the future, and life is worth the living just because he lives. Let us live to the best of our ability, concerned but not worried, uplifted in courage and in hope. Amen.